Aboriginal people know by looking at the signs of nature. We know when the ants is climbing up the tree. We know there's going to be a big flood or big rain. We know when the kangaroos stop having babies, there's going to be a big drought. We know our rivers, we know our environment, we know how it works in the great circle of life.
From the islands off the coast of Australia to remote areas inland, the Indigenous peoples have been closely intertwined with nature for tens of thousands of years. We set out to meet the traditional owners of the land who are fighting to reclaim their rights to the most precious resource on Earth, water.
Yama, my name's Bruce Shillingsworth. My traditional name is Mundagara. Mundagara meaning rainbow snake. We're here on the river, the Darling River, a beautiful river. We go and visit or attend our ceremonies in other countries. We put a bit of water in the ochre, in the mud, comes from the river, and we paint our face. It's a form of respect, acknowledging Mother Earth and what it gives us.
Bruce Shillingsworth calls himself a water warrior and is among the 1 million Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living in Australia. Indigenous peoples are the nation's poorest and most disadvantaged group. Elders like Bruce say they believe they can better manage the rivers and deal with the effects of climate change, but have little to no water entitlements.
So to understand water allocation in Australia, we need to consider the history and what has happened particularly since British invasion. Australia has never signed any kind of agreement with Indigenous peoples to formalise that arrangement. You can see treaties in place in other settler colonial societies like the US, like Canada, New Zealand, but not here in Australia. So it's all contingent on that erroneous assumption that the land belonged to no one and that there were no laws governing land and water management. It's a story of theft, it's a story of dispossession, it's a story of great injustice, and it's a story that is being perpetrated in the modern context.
Australia's largest river network, the Murray-Darling Basin, spans an area as big as France and Spain combined. It's known as the heart of the agricultural industry, growing 40% of the country's produce, worth more than 22 billion Australian dollars each year.
Over 2 million people live within the Murray-Darling Basin, but the vast majority of water that is taken within the Murray-Darling Basin is used for agriculture and growing food and fibre.
Although Indigenous communities make up 9.3% of the area's population, they hold just 0.2% of the total available water across the state of New South Wales.
It is a low amount, and the New South Wales government and the department and the team that I work in, we're doing our best to try and combat that disparity.
A water use right is a license or entitlement that grants access to water. Governments allocate water periodically based on factors like rainfall. The entitlement holders can then choose how to use that water.
First Nations people has a right to water. Where's our decision making here with the Australian government?
So when we think about who owns the water rights in the Murray-Darling Basin, and we accept the fact that the Crown has taken that water from Aboriginal people, it's then reallocated it to a whole lot of other people. And about 70% of that water goes to irrigation. So it's predominantly a commercial use of water for the purposes of irrigation and farming.
Over the years, crops such as cotton and almonds have been targeted for using too much water for production and harming the rivers. But the decision of how the water gets used and what to grow may trickle down to economics.
What our rules do is look at how much water can be taken from the system depending on if it's a wet or a dry season. And then it's up to the producers and the growers and the farmers to work out how they can actually generate the most value from that portion of water.
The crop last season would have generated about 1.25 million tonnes of fibre and about 1.5 million tonnes of cotton seed. Last season, the value of that was around 4 billion Australian dollars.
Under Australia's Constitution, the power to allocate and control the way that water is used rests with the states. But it's complicated. Because since 2007, we've had a Federal Water Act. And one of the things that Federal Water Act put in place was the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And this sets a limit on how much water those states and territories can actually issue to other people.
In 2012, the federal government signed the $13 billion Australian Murray-Darling Basin Plan, aimed at balancing the needs of states, irrigators, and the environment. But there was no mention of Indigenous water rights. The government has pledged about $40 million Australian dollars in 2018 to help fund Indigenous water rights through the Aboriginal Water Entitlements Program, and another $9 million in 2023. But Indigenous peoples we spoke to say they haven't seen a penny.
So we've come from a past where water was seen as just something to be taken to grow food and sustain towns and communities. But now we're really seeing it as something far more important, and important to everybody in the basin.
We went through an open expression of interest process throughout the state, and we asked Aboriginal people to apply to sit on a regional Aboriginal water committee. We want to make sure that over a period of time that we get to hear the information that I guess has been lost for a long time in the water management space.
Our interview requests with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority were declined, but the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water issued this comment. The department intends to deliver the Aboriginal Water Entitlements Program in the Murray-Darling Basin before the end of the current financial year, because we recognize that First Nations peoples have waited too long.
Put the water back in the river, not just for us, but for the environment.
Thank you very much, Bruce Shillings.
The outcomes for Aboriginal communities in New South Wales are definitely not great, and we need to do better, and we are committed to doing better for Aboriginal communities in New South Wales.
I think it is important that Indigenous people, have some water rights, and I see, our government is moving that way. They're moving that way to purchase water so that the Indigenous people can manage that water the way they want in their areas. So, I think we're already on that journey.
I will acknowledge that in the state of Victoria just last year, for the very first time, the state has acknowledged aqua nullius. It released a policy document called Water is Life. This was the Victorian government's policy on Aboriginal water rights and water justice. It is the first document in the history of Australia issued by a government that has acknowledged aqua nullius.
Bruce paints traditional art as a form of preserving culture and raising awareness surrounding water issues. He lives in Sydney, where his voice can be amplified.
Well, our land is now protected. No one can go there unless they've been asked and get permission. So we have native title on our land. It's way out in, sort of in the middle of Australia. This is the sun. Well, this is the symbol of the sun. So we've got all our different symbols that represent the different, patterns of nature and tells a story, just like the one with the people sitting around the campfire. When we do our ceremonies and our dances and sing our songs, it's so important. When we gather together, we sing. We sing to the birds, we sing to the trees, we sing to our rivers, we sing to the land to bring back the balance. Mother Earth needs that balance. The water problem we have now is a part of genocide. It's wiping our people off this continent. It's taking them off their traditional lands. And that's what we're here for. I'm here for my children and their children's children. So that's where we've got to keep our culture alive and keep telling our stories and educating whoever.